Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Frederick, and welcome to this evening's Operational Excellence Society's webinar. At least evening for those of us in Europe, and good day for those who are in the United States. I see that the attendees are starting to drop in. Now it's around 6 o'clock in Europe and 12 o'clock in the US. Just to check that you guys can actually hear me okay with my microphone, if you look down towards the bottom of your screen, there should be an option on the Zoom menu to raise your hand. So if I could just ask some of you to go down and click on the raise hand, and then I'll just know that you're able to hear me. Okay, perfect. There we go. So we've got a hand raised there. Perfect, thank you. And we've also got someone calling in. I've got a chat here from someone in Myanmar, in Burma. Fantastic, all international audience today. Okay, well, I will kick off and get started. So, welcome to the Operational Excellence Society's webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled Lessons from the Military on Creating Highly Effective Teams. I'm your host, Frederick Fladmark. I'm a former Army officer and now independent consultant. I'll come back and talk a little bit more about myself. But first, I'm just going to mention quickly a little bit about Operational Excellence Society and what it is. So our intent is to share ideas, knowledge, know-how related to operational excellence, improving company performance and the circumstances of the people that work there. At the Operational Excellence Society, we believe that operational excellence is the following: a state of readiness attained as the efforts throughout the enterprise to reach a state of alignment for pursuing its strategies, where the corporate culture is committed to the continuous and deliberate improvement of company performance and the circumstances of those who work there, and is a precursor to becoming a high-performance organization. So we grew from a relatively small LinkedIn group founded by Joseph Paris, who's this gentleman here with the cowboy hat. And it grew into a much larger group with over 68,000 members and growing by around 250 members each month. It's the largest group by far on LinkedIn dedicated to the subject and discipline of operational excellence. And if any of you guys are not a member, then please come and join us. Eventually, we left cyberspace to become a face-to-face organization and founded the Operational Excellence Society. So who are we? We're a think tank, a creator and aggregator of knowledge, know-how and wisdom, open to the public. There's no membership dues or fees. We're all naturally curious, critical thinkers, and we're all very multicultural, also, as we can see with the attendees here on the webinar, and we have an international audience. And then what do? Well, we strive to help and improve company performance and the circumstances of those who work there, promote the principles of OPEX, exchange ideas, knowledge, and experience. And we're also mentors to those wanting to learn and connectors of people who need with people who have. So the website for further details, you'll find there our body of knowledge. There's over 12,000 pieces of information and articles and other content. There's a bookstore there where you can build your own personal library of books recommended by the Society. It's also sorted by genre. There's also an events calendar, the roster of the members on the advisory board, and also our sponsors, and a host of really great information. So if you haven't checked out the website, I recommend that you go have a look. And then just something quickly on webinar logistics. All lines are muted during the webinar. If you are connected using a device, you'll see that there's 3 options for communicating down at the bottom. So there's chat, raise and lower your hand, and Q&A. Just when we're talking about Q&A, if any of you guys do have a question, please feel free to stick it in the Q&A, and I will get round to questions at the end of my end of the talk today. If you've dialed in, you won't have this option. I'm also going to try out a little bit of new functionality on the webinar today, which is a polling. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that works smoothly, but if there's any technical areas, please bear with me. Yeah, and then time permitting, hopefully we'll get around to some questions if any of you have those, and hopefully we should be wrapped up within the hour. Yep, and then within one day you'll also receive a link to the recorded copy of the webinar. So let's get cracking on with the content and why you guys are here. So I'll start with talking a little bit about myself. So I'm really glad that I've managed to make the time to be able to hold this webinar for you guys today. The military really does spend so much time and money and effort on these topics, so it's really great to have this opportunity to spread the value that's inside the military. So to say a little bit about my background, so these photos that you'll see of me are for me when I was working in the military, but before I joined the military, I originally had a background in the finance industry. I have a master's in economics and politics and worked in the finance industry actually in 2008, 2009, during the financial crisis. So I really do know what working with risk is all about. And after that, I joined the Norwegian military as an officer. And I worked there from 2010, 2017, left as a captain. And during that time, I mostly worked with leading teams of analysts. We supported decision makers all the way from tactical level, which is right down on the ground, on the battlefield, all the way up to strategic level. So we would support tactical battlefield commanders in infantry battalions or special forces, or we'd, be supporting, the head of an army, or all the way up to a much higher strategic level. I deployed twice to Afghanistan and received the US Commendation Medal for my work with American Special Forces when I was working in Kabul. And then I left recently to start my own consultancy. So I support now business leaders that are looking to making their organizations more adaptable and agile. And I offer a different type of consultancy services that really focuses on creating nimble organizations and nimble teams and leaders that can lead in these types of organization. And what we do is we take the best methodologies from the military that are proven to work and tailor them unique to the businesses that we work with. So that's a little bit about me. So let's crack on with today. So today, I want to concentrate on how do we go about creating highly effective teams and take some lessons from the military. And today I'm going to split this webinar into 4 parts. So the first part is why. Why is team dynamics so why is it worth looking at in today's world and today's business environment? Then I'm going to talk about what. So what's the theory behind this? And what is it that allows teams to perform at a high level? Thirdly, how do we actually go about doing this in practice? And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about what if. So if you guys are interested in finding out any more information about this. So starting with why. So why is it important to focus on teams, develop teams, and develop team dynamics? Well, I'd like to start with a little story with my background. So this picture is actually taken from one of my very first winter exercises when I was working in the military. And this is when I was a recruit getting trained up, and it was my very first winter exercise. Now, on the start of the exercise, we'd been training on the winter and how to survive in winter conditions for about 3 days. And this is incidentally up in the north of Norway, north of the Arctic Circle. So the winters are pretty harsh up there. Anyway, a few days into this winter exercise, we were given a mission with 2 teams that we were supposed to do a reconnaissance mission on a depot. And this involved traversing through the Norwegian Arctic terrain for about 70 kilometers. And this was something that was going to take 2 to 3 days in order to get to our objective. And we were carrying, as you can see in this photo, some pretty huge backpacks and pulling some rather heavy sleds. Now, remember, as we started that day, it actually turned out the weather was really good at the start of the day. The sun was shining. And I remember as we were skiing along, we had a fantastic pace. We were skiing downhill. And every time we stopped and we had to do something administrative, like take our backpacks off to change our clothing or get some food out or to reorientate with the map, everything seemed to go pretty smoothly. We were well fed. We had a lot of energy from having slept the night before. And everything was pretty smooth. To take an example, putting on these backpacks was something that required 2 people because they were so heavy. One person would have to lift up, put it on their knee, and then the other person would kind of put their arms through the backpack and then manage to stand up, all while being on their skis. However, fast forward, I think it was about 22 hours later, we only had one stop for an hour to get some food in us, but otherwise we've been going for 22 hours. And the weather changed, and as you can see, this is a photo as the weather started changing. We started getting a strong wind, and it started snowing, and there was very poor visibility. And we had to, in the start of the day, we'd be going downhill, and towards this end part of the day, we started going uphill. And after about 22 hours, we were completely exhausted. And at one point, our whole team dynamic ended up collapsing. And what happened was each of us individuals, we ended up focusing on ourselves because we'd become so tired and the conditions were so harsh. We stopped focusing on helping the other person next to us. So anything to do with putting on the backpack, helping your buddy with putting on his skis, or orientating with the map suddenly took 2-3 times longer. And the team dynamic got so bad that we ended up traveling in the direction of a cliff on top of this mountain, and one of the instructors had to step in to stop us actually skiing off the edge of a cliff. So what's the point of this story? Well, the reason that things collapsed in this environment is because the teamwork, the team dynamic failed. And as the team dynamic and the team interaction collapsed and everyone started withdrawing and focusing on themselves, the results also collapsed. Now, in challenging environments, the quality of the team dynamic, that is how all the members are interacting, dictates the results of the team. Often it's not important what we achieve as individuals, but what we achieve as a team. So, as a phrase you might have heard, the whole is worth more than the sum of the parts. So another reason why focusing on team is so important, I'm not going to get into a long history lesson with management theory, but I think if you can generally generalize the last century, the 20th century, we can all agree that was characterized as the machine age, as the industrial age spread throughout the world. And in a way, we can characterize that period as the management theory is all about reducing variation in production. So these processes like Toyota production system, lean, trying to improve efficiency, were the focus in management. However, now we're firmly in the information age. We've had the internet for over 20 years now, and we're in an information age and a digital age. And that is characterized by speed of information, interconnectedness, and a dynamic where things are changing and unpredictable. Just like in the picture on the right-hand side, this is a flock of starlings. Trying to predict how that will fly throughout the sky is impossible. And that also characterizes a lot of business environments. Now, working as a team in the industrial age is completely different to working in a team now when you're in a business environment where everything is volatile and changeable. And so in order to tackle those challenges, we really need to have teams that can cope with those environments. So just a couple of information pieces here. So the last time I held this presentation was for some startups. And so I found an interesting piece of research there that as a startup, as long as there's a market for your product or service and you have enough funding to keep you going, then the number one reason that startups fail is having the right team. Also, another piece of research by a team expert or team researcher that was printed in the Harvard Business Review, they found that patterns of communication to be the most important predictor of a team's success. So not only were they as significant as all the other factors, so individual intelligence, personality, skill, it was all of those things combined were still not as important as the patterns of communication. And what he really means by patterns of communication is the team dynamic. That is how people are interacting. So this is another interesting report that I found. So this is a report by the Royal College of Surgeons from the United Kingdom. So they're kind of the organization that's in charge of quality control and setting best practice for surgeons. And what they found, what talking about in this report, was the importance of surgical teams and how patient results and errors in surgeries are very much linked to the quality of the team dynamic. And if you think about surgical teams, or generally in the medical industry, they're increasingly made up of experts with much higher levels of expertise than they were just, say, 20, 30 years ago. You know, the surgeons, anesthetists, specialized nurses all have longer periods of training and are becoming more and more specialized. And as they become more specialized, they become increasingly dependent on the teamwork, because there's no one person in that surgery team that has all the answers. The answers arrive as the summation of all the interactions. And so this is very similar, bringing it back to the military. In the military, this is, you know, you can think of a standard infantry squad, you know, an infantry team, and that team will be made up of a squad leader. It will have a medic, someone who's very good at giving first aid. You have an expert and a radio man. You have something called a forward air controller that can bring in fire some airplanes. You might have a scout. And although all these people are soldiers and all have similar soldiering skills as their basic foundation, they each have a speciality. And their results as a team are nothing when they work as individuals, but when they come together as a team, they can achieve things that they can't do as individuals. And in this way, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So like 1 + 1 is 3. And this leads me to the first lesson of today. Your results are dependent on how well your team works together. And the more complex your environment or the more innovative your task is, the more dependent we are on teams. And as we move into business environments that are more and more complex, and we need to be more and more innovative, then we become more and more reliant on teams in order to solve the problems and take advantage of the opportunities. So moving on to what. So what does this actually look like? What is the theory? Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to try and simulate a card game that I often do in some of the workshops. So hopefully this will work over the webinar. It should be a little bit of fun, and I'm going to try doing a little bit of the polling. So for you, those of you that have ability to get to your computer and press some buttons, then now's the time to do it. And what we're going to do is try and organize. I'm going to bring up some cards onto the presentation, and I just want you guys to try and help me organize the cards. So we're going to try and organize these cards into 3 buckets. So I'm going to show you a card, and it's going to have a set of behaviors on them. And so we need to think, okay, to what extent do these behaviors promote teamwork? Or do they hinder teamwork? Or does it really depend on the situation? It can be either or. So let me bring up the first card. So the behavior here is cooperative, supportive, accommodating. And so I'll try and bring up this poll. So let me see here, launch poll. So if someone shows the behavior is cooperative, supportive, accommodating, does this promote teamwork or does this hinder teamwork? So if you just go into hopefully there's a screen that's popped up. And okay, we've got some answers popping up here. Perfect. Let me see if I can end this poll and bring up the answers for you. Share results. So hopefully you guys should be able to see the results here. So the majority of you guys said it promotes teamwork. Some of you thought it was hinders or depends. So generally, I'll stop sharing this now. So if I can remove this here. So generally, we would say that these behaviors are good at promoting teamwork. They help the team dynamic, and that's pretty much what everyone, the majority, agreed with. So let's try this on the next behavior. So if someone exhibits the behaviors of self-sacrificing, self-pitying, and complaining, does that promote or does that hinder teamwork? So let me see if I can do poll 2. Launch poll. So if you guys click on the poll that's popped up here, does this hinder, promote, or does it hinder teamwork? Does it promote teamwork? Or does it depend on the situation? Let's see what answers we get popping up here. Okay, there's still some answers coming in. Okay, let me end the poll and share the results. So hopefully, guys, you guys can see the results now. And I think this one's quite easy, as most of you have got, these behaviors are going to hinder teamwork. Now, here's one that's a little bit harder. Let's see what comes up here. So the next card is analytical, unbiased, and rational. So let me see if I can bring up this next poll. So what do you guys do you think? Do you think the behavior analytical, unbiased, and rational, does that promote teamwork or does that hinder teamwork? Okay, perfect. We have some results popping up. I'll just give it a few more seconds so everyone can answer. Okay. I'll end the poll and share the results. So hopefully you guys can see the results now. So the most of you guys say it depends. Some people thought that it promotes teamwork. Now, of course, there's no right or wrong answer here. This is just in your perception. But I would argue that this very much depends on the situation. So you can imagine a team of accountants. Now, if you're working on a team of accountants and so you have team members that are analytical, unbiased, and rational, that might be something that helps promote the teamwork in that environment. However, if you were, say, a care worker or a nurse working in the healthcare industry where you're working with people and you're often exhibiting analytical, unbiased, and rational behaviors, that might not be something that's going to help the team dynamic in that context. So, and normally what I do with this game, it's quite a good fun game, gets the team dynamic going, is I give them a lot more cards and we get them to place them out. And what you end up seeing is you end up seeing certain patterns that emerge. So a lot of these cards are the cards that have a yellow ring around them, caring, supportive, encouraging, accommodating. They're generally things that most people agree promotes teamwork. Then there's these behaviors in the middle, like being analytical, unbiased, rational, or cautious and reliable, accepts tasks. Those things really depend on the context that you're in. And then on the right-hand side, there are certain behaviors, like those cards in the dark gray, that generally will hinder teamwork, like being reserved and distant and withdrawn. Those are things that are not really going to help the team dynamic. So this kind of brings me on to the second lesson, which is that some behaviors will almost always promote teamwork, some behaviors will almost always hinder teamwork, and some behaviors will either promote or hinder depending on the situation that you're in. So let me bring up my next slide, and I'm going to show you a little bit of academic theory. Now, for those of you who have read a lot of academics or academic theories about team development, or have studied this at university, or are either interested, you will have heard of people like Tuckman or Byron or Parsons, who have quite famous team theories that are used a lot in the consultancy world. So people like Tuckman, who has the model of performing, forming, storming, norming, is quite a well-known model. Now, the theory that I want to focus on is the theory on the right-hand side. So the theory is developed by a professor called Endre Shervold. He works at the Trondheim University in Norway, and he's produced something called SPGR, which is systemizing the person-group relation. And his theory is basically that which is presented on the right-hand side. So if you remember back to the cards that we were playing with earlier, you have some cards that had a blue ring. So the last one was analytical, for example. Now, those behaviors that are on those cards are what he calls control behaviors. They're all the behaviors that are, they're task orientated. They're to doing with structure, process, getting things done on time. He says the next group of behaviors are nurture. Those are all the interpersonal behaviors. The next ones are what he calls opposition. So that's everything to do with challenge. It's to do with non-conforming. It's to being an individual, voicing your opinion, constructive conflict, or maybe non-constructive conflict. And then the last of the four is what he calls dependent. And that's everything to do with submitting to the team and the group's norms and the social rules. Now, what his point is the way that this graph is made up is it doesn't really matter what you call it. These four types of behaviors they kind of arrive in all the different theories of all the different practitioners. They just have different words for it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue using his kind of buckets or his theory as we go forward, because I think it's there's some really, really interesting insights when we have a look at this theory. Now, looking at let me see if I can get up something to note with here. So I've got a spotlight. One second here. Hopefully you guys can see there's a spotlight. So if I just talk about synergy here. Now, synergy, Shervall talks about that this arrives when you have these four behaviors in balance. So when you have the blue, green, red, and gray behaviors in balance, synergy and high-performing environment will emerge in a team. However, when people start withdrawing and focusing on themselves, just like in our example when I was working in the military and our tough winter exercise, when people withdraw and focus on themselves, the team dynamic breaks down. And so what I thought I would do here is just bring up a little piece of research that Google did. As those of you who are into team development will have no doubt seen this pop up on people's Twitter accounts, and it's quite a famous piece of kind of research onto teams that has popped up a lot in popular news. And it's quite an interesting piece of research. It was pretty detailed. I think they took over 100 teams and they did over 200 different reports. And what they would look to do was to measure what was it that made high-performing teams at Google. And they went in thinking that actually if we put together the best teams of the best individuals with the most PhDs and the most expertise, that those will perform highest. And that's not what they actually found. What they found is who is on a team matters much less than how the team members interact and the structure of their work and how people view their contributions. And so what they found was, what are the 5 most important things working on a team? And those are the things presented on the left, things like psychological safety and dependability, etc. Now, the reason that I brought up Google's research here and their graph is just to show you that the behaviors that Shervall and the other practitioners talk about tracks quite well. So the first one that Google talk about is psychological safety. And so this tracks very well with the idea of nurture. It's all about interpersonal, creating a trusting environment. The next things Google talk about is dependability. So people get things done on time. They're kind of submitting to the group and meeting the group's expectations. And that's exactly what Shervall would talk about in terms of dependence. The next one is structure and clarity. So team members have very clear goals, and that tracks very well with the idea of the control behaviors. And the last two, they kind of track, not perfectly, but what you'll see is we're in the same ballpark, and we're talking about very similar things when we look at both of these pieces of research and both of these theories. Now, when we look at these behaviors, you can often think of these behaviors as being on a spectrum. So if you think of the blue behaviors, so they're things like, making sure the report's handed in on time, that things are up to scratch, they're task orientated. And this might be on, say, the left-hand side of the spectrum. And on the other side of the spectrum, you'll have things which are more related to interpersonal dynamic. So it's a more nurturing your employees, you know, caring for people. And in some ways you can think about that as a spectrum. Either you can be very task focused, or you can be very care focused and looking after people. And so similarly, you have another spectrum, and that is the spectrum from red to gray. And red being, you know, that's being, you know, as an individual, it's prioritizing your own needs. It's maybe being a little bit self-centered or demanding, being critical, confronting what the team's doing, expressing yourself as an individual. And the gray behaviors are much more submitting to the team, conforming to the group's expectations, swallowing your own individual needs for the needs of the group. And those then you can also see on a spectrum. Now, what this model talks about is when you have a good team dynamic, these behaviors will be in balance. And if you get too much of one type of behavior, the model, this whole model will, or if you can imagine these balls spinning around, if one of these balls, say the red one got too big or the blue one got too big, then the whole model would collapse and become unbalanced. So this brings me on to my next poll. So let's see if I can bring this one up. I'll just present it first. So this slide, so in the military, I remember doing my first year of leadership training, and after we did, you know, maybe 8-week practical and theoretical leadership training. And at the very end of that, they said, look, guys, if you only remember one thing, remember this. And that is complete your mission and take care of your soldiers. And if you forget everything else, just remember this. And that if you do it, because if you do that, you won't go far wrong. Now, if I ask you guys, so let me try the new poll. The behaviors of completing your mission. What type of behaviors is that? Is that kind of rational, analytical, task focus? Or is it more, you know, green? Is it more interpersonal, focusing on your men? Is it more about challenging and having conflict? Or is it more about dependence, being obedient and loyal and conformist? So if you guys can vote, hopefully you guys can vote. And then the second part is take care of your soldiers. So is taking care of your soldiers, is that a task focus? Is that more interpersonal? Is that more red behavior, being self-centered, task provocative? Or is it more about the team over the individual? Is it more about being obedient and loyal and conformist? So we've got answers popping in here. Let's give a couple of seconds for people to submit their answers. Okay, I'll end the poll there and take them up. Share results. Yeah, and so it seems I've successfully managed to explain this. So completing your mission is very much a task focus, what we call a control type of behavior. And taking care of your soldiers is very much nurturing. It's more an interpersonal, caring set of behaviors. Now, of course, what they were really saying is balance that of focusing on the mission to looking after your men. Because if you're focusing just on your mission, you know, your soldiers aren't going to eat at the right time, they're not going to get enough water, and they're going to get burnt out and they're going to get too tired. And on the other hand, if you just look after your soldiers and they make sure they're getting enough rest the whole time, and you don't have a focus on your mission, your results are also going to suffer. So what they're really saying is get a balance between these set of behaviors. So this brings me on to my third lesson. So teamwork is all about balance. And it's all about balancing these 4 fundamental types of behaviors. So you have nurture, control, dependence, and challenge. Now in Scandinavia, we have these 2 words here, kos and hygge. Maybe some of you have heard about the concept of hygge from Denmark or Scandinavia, which is this idea of things being nice and comfy and really cute, having a lovely time together. And if you have too much kos and hygge, I think everybody will have been in work environments like this. If it's too much of that, nothing ever gets done. And if you've got too much focus on the mission and the task and too much results focus and a boss who's really pushing people, then people get burnt out and they say, screw this, and they leave. And if you have too much loyalty, too much conformism in a group, you end up getting groupthink and nobody criticizes why we do anything. And if people are too competitive and too much putting themselves forward before the group, then you get a very political environment with a lot of backstabbing. And I think everyone will kind of have experienced these different work environments throughout their careers. So the next question is there such thing as an ideal team? So regardless of the context. So let me open up this for a poll to see if anyone's seeing as an ideal team or wants a poll. So what do you guys think? Yes, there is one type of ideal team. Like in Lord of the Rings, there's one ring to rule them all. Is there one type of team to rule them all? Or you can answer no, each team is unique. And I've heard some people say, you know what, I've been on lots of different good teams and I've been on lots of bad teams, but there was just something about good teams. I don't know what it was, but they all felt the same. Or do you, and then you can also say, I've read a lot of books, like there's one book about the All Blacks, and the guy basically says, the All Blacks being the New Zealand rugby team, which is very, very successful and has a very high win percentage, by far the best rugby team in the world. And the guy basically goes and reads, the guy spends a lot of time with the New Zealand rugby team and writes down all the things that make them successful. And the book very much comes across as, if you do this, your team will be great. So let me see. Yep. Some of you saying yes, there's one type of team to. Okay. Let me end this poll and I'll take up the results. So if those of you who haven't voted would like to vote now, and I'll end the poll. Okay, let me end the poll there and share the results. So there's a little bit of disagreement here. So some people thinking, yes, there is one type of ideal team, and an equal amount saying, no, there's no such thing. And some people very much in love with the All Blacks rugby team. Maybe there's someone here who's calling in or dialing in from New Zealand. So let me talk a little bit about making the ideal team and making high-performing teams. So let me answer this question over the next few slides. So you can say that the team group dynamic is the sum of the behaviors that they exhibit. So it's the sum of all the individual contributions and all their exhibited behaviors. And so you can see this in the graph. It's all these interactions that happen between the individuals. And the sum of those make up the orange circle, which is conceptually we can call the group dynamic. And of course, all of this happens within a context. Now, this team here, it might be a rugby team. So the context there might be they're playing a sport, they're playing the sport of rugby, it's happening in a certain institution, maybe a school, or it's a professional sports team, or this might be an agile software team that's building software within Microsoft. And so the context then is a large international corporate organization. So my point here is that every team has a unique team dynamic, which is the orange, and it also has a unique context, which is the gray. So I just want to focus a little bit on context here. So we can think about context, and I'm going to do this conceptually by making a 4x4 and creating two spectrums. So if we create two spectrums here, one where there is a focus on rules and procedures on the left-hand side, and then moving over to the right-hand side where there's more of a focus on collaboration between the members. And then on the bottom, there's more of a results and a focus on yourself. And we're up at the top, there's more of a focus on understanding intention. Why is it we're doing what we're doing? If we look at the first team dynamic, or the first type of context, it's something that is in the SPGR theory is called reservation. Now that is where there's a focus on down the bottom here. So there's a focus on personal results, so focusing on yourself as a team member, and then also a focus on the rules and procedure. So here, this works best when the group task can be split up into subtasks and everything is kind of done independently and the leader coordinates everything. So he gathers the sum of the expert contributions. So you could think of this like a very, very simple army unit at the very start of their training. they'll get a lot of direction from their squad leader because they don't really know what they're doing. Or you could maybe give another example. If you can, I like to think of a McDonald's team. So a team of workers working at McDonald's. You know, you'll have one guy who's flipping burgers. He's only worried about the burgers. You have another person who's on fries, making sure the fries are done. You have one person who's focused on customer service, and everybody just does their own little thing. And then the shift leader has to coordinate everything. So the next environment is what we call team spirit. This is classically what we think about when we think of a team, a sports team. So this works best in environments in which teams need to impart a lot of effort over a shorter space of time. So this is when there's a stable environment of non-complex tasks. So teams are executing pre-rehearsed sets of responses. So this is very typical of a sports team, or this is very typical of a infantry squad in the army. So an infantry squad they'll go to the shooting range, they'll spend a lot of time rehearsing and practicing, and then when they meet a specific context, then they'll just execute a specific set of routines together. This is also what if anyone's heard of CRM, I think it's crew resource management. It's the type of thing that flight crews will do in airplanes. They'll have a playbook of responses. So if something happens, like a certain warning light comes on, they will execute a set of basically a checklist of actions. Now, the third level is when we have a focus on rules and procedures, but also we're moving from a focus on yourself as an individual to looking at the bigger picture. Why are we doing what we're doing? And so this we call the production level. And so a good example of this is Kaizen. That, you know, if people have read about the Toyota production system with things like continual improvement. So this works best in stable environments. So this is where the teams have to be creative, but it's within constraints. So you can think of something like continual improvement, Lean, Kanban, Toyota production system. You know, those people are looking at how they can reset a forge, a press that's pressing metal, how they can do that quicker or with less waste. But they're not coming up with a new type of car, or they're not coming up with a new mode of transport. It's not particularly innovative. It's continual improvement. And the next level, final level, is the highest level, and that's when people are focusing on the collaboration between the team, but also on understanding the intention. And we call this level innovation, free flow. And this is where people are challenging the status quo. And this works best in complex environments that are in change, where one needs to be creative and innovative. The dynamic is often fast-paced, and this is, you can maybe think of a tech startup or a team working in somewhere like Bell Laboratories, for those that have heard of them. And so this brings me on to the fourth lesson. So the idea of an ideal team is actually a myth. There is not one ideal team dynamic that will work in all contexts. What you've got to do is create the team dynamic that's specific for your context. So what I'd like to do now is bring on the last poll. And so what we're going to do is talk about maturity level. So the 4 levels that I talked of before. So that's reservation. You have, let me see if I can get my spotlight up here. Let me see. Yeah. So reservation, this was the typical McDonald's team. Team spirit, this is the typical sports team. Production, you can think here of continual improvement, Kaizen, Toyota production system. And up here at the top, we can think of an innovative team that's coming up with maybe a new selection or a new technology. Now, the question here is, what behaviors on these teams does everybody have to master? So at the different levels, what behaviors does everyone have to master? And we're going to go back to these 4 behaviors that we talked about earlier. So this one's a little bit longer. So let's see if this works. Hopefully you can see the poll. So on the lowest level, reservation. So you can think of a typical McDonald's team. What behaviors do each and every individual in that team need to master? Do they need to be able to challenge each other, be tough and critical, and challenge the way things are done? I'll give you a little bit of a hint. Then, that's not really what they're going to be able to need to do. If we look at the top, nurture. Do they need to have a warm, social, trusting dynamic within the team? Yes or no? Does each person in the team need to show dependency, obedience, and loyalty and conformity? Do they need to make sure others are being conformist and loyal and obedient to the team? Or is that something just the leader needs to do? So if you guys just would like to plot in your answers as we go. So the next level is team spirit. So think of a typical sports team. What behaviors do each individual need to master on a sports team? Do they need to be nurturing? Do they need to make sure everybody's being obedient? Do they need to take control of the training in terms of being rational and analytical? Do they also need to challenge other people on the teams? Do they need to challenge the coach and the way things are done? And on the third level, in a Toyota production system, what type of behaviors does everybody need to do? So, you can pick on one or more of the answers here. And then on the final level, what behaviors does everybody need to master? So we'll give a few seconds here for people to lay their votes in. So you can, if you think there's just one type of behavior they need to master, put that down. If you think there's more, click on several answers. So for those of you who haven't voted, just if you'd like to make your vote now, and I'll end the poll in a few seconds. This is maybe a little bit tricky, this one. Bit of a harder set of questions. Okay, so I'll round off the poll now. And share the results. So hopefully you guys can see the answers that have popped up here. So generally what we say is that a team that's at reservation, each individual in their team needs to exhibit nurturing behaviors. Everybody in the team has to get along. But as an individual, you don't really need to be doing anything else in that. Both the leader and the system will take care of making sure everybody's conforming, taking responsibility for things done on time, and for also challenging the system to improve over time. And so then the next level of team spirit is a level up. And here each individual needs to both conform and also make sure that everybody else is conforming. You can think of a typical sports team. You need to be following the rules of the team, but you also make sure everybody else is following the rules of the team, which is not necessarily something you have to do if you're in a McDonald's team. And next level up, here everybody needs to take responsibility for the task. Toyota production system, everybody needs to take responsibility for, okay, how do we make an improvement? How do we make sure things are done on time? And then at the last level, everybody needs to be able to also challenge. Everybody else needs to master this ability of constructive criticism, challenging the ideas. Is that the best way to solve this problem? No, I don't think so. Why are you doing it this way? Etc., etc. Okay. Now, conceptually, you can think about these behaviors in a team working and spinning around and being in a dynamic. So when you have synergy, this is way up at the top here, when you have synergy, the team has a common mental picture of what the task is and how they can go about achieving their goals. And when the team is down the bottom here in withdrawal, when people are focusing on themselves and their individual contributions, the team needs a very strong and directive leadership in order for it to achieve their goals. So you can think of the typical McDonald's team. If the shift leader is not there, the team is going to struggle unless a new leader steps up. Now, generally, the behaviors that individuals don't exhibit must then be taken care of by the leader or the system. So these are, if we go back a slide, all these, let me see if I can get my pointer up again. Yeah, all these behaviors here in this area, those are not taken care of by the individuals in the team, but they're taken care of by the leader in the team. So as teams get up to this higher level of innovation, they have a different dynamic when they're down at the bottom. And so they have much more of an external focus. They're trying to understand why we're here, what are we doing here, how do we fit into what's going on in the bigger context. People are more generalists, and they're looking to be confronted to check their ideas are good. They have open mental models. They're looking to do things differently. And it works very well when you're doing complex tasks and the environment is dynamic. However, it takes time. It's a slow dynamic. And although it works well in dynamic, complex environments, it's not the dynamic that you want when you're, for example, playing a game of football. You don't want people stopping and going, hey, why are we taking corners this way? People just have to execute what they're doing. And so this brings us on to teams operating at a low maturity level. You can think of those teams as well-oiled machines. It's like grouping experts together. Mental models are more closed. People are repeating, doing the same things over. The strengths of this is that it's very focused and very effective in pre-prepared situations when you're doing the same thing over and over. However, this dynamic does not work when you suddenly enter complex scenarios. And this really brings me back to the start of my talk when I was talking about companies going from, if I'm going to simplify it, going from the machine age, industrial age, when you have continual improvement, and we're now going into an age which is the information age. It's much more dynamic. Things happen a lot more quickly. It's a lot more complex. And what you see is a lot of companies, they have very, very old traditions, and they have management traditions, and they have these lower maturity levels in teams where the mental models are closed. This is how we do things here. The strong leadership. However, more and more of these companies are experiencing more and more complex problems, and the way for them to tackle these problems is to change their team dynamic. And when you change your team dynamic, you're then able to solve these more complex tasks. So if we talk about the levels here, so you have the kind of McDonald's team at the bottom, and then at the top you have innovation. And so you can think of this like a spinning top. So when you have these 4 different types of behaviors balancing each other out, the model becomes almost like a spinning top, like we have down here. And the faster the spinning top spins, as everybody knows who's played with the children's toy, is the faster it spins, the more robust that spinning top is. So if this spinning top's going around at 1,000,000 miles an hour, if I touch it with my finger, it's going to just wobble a little bit, and then it's going to go back to spinning smoothly. And it's very similar in a team. If you have a balance of these behaviors, the team is going to spin well. However, if you have an overweight of one of the behaviors, the spinning tops is going to fall over. Or if the dynamic is very slow, or if you say maybe you don't have a balance of behaviors, you just have one person who's always looking after everybody else and one person who's always task focused. And say one of those people leaves on holiday for 3 weeks. What happens to the team dynamic then? Well, unless someone else fills that role and provides balance again, the team is going to, or the spinning top is just going to wobble and collapse and fall out of its balanced state again. So this is the analogy. So if you guys remember one thing today, so it's this idea of high-performing teams. They're like a spinning top that spin quickly, and the better balance they have between the behaviors, the better the spinning top spins. So this is my 5th lesson. So the more complex the context, the more important your team dynamic is. So how complex the problem is really dictates what dynamic you need in your team. So if you're setting up a new McDonald's franchise, you're not really going to have to worry about the team dynamic. However, if you're solving complicated problems in, say, the digital space where there's lots of things changing and problems popping up and complexities, then your team dynamic is extremely important. So how do you actually go about doing this? Well, I can talk a little bit about how we do this. So hopefully I've convinced you a little bit about team dynamic being important. So how does this actually work? So first of all, just to clarify some of the expressions here. So we talk about team building, but team building can really split that into 2 areas. You have team development and you have team training. And so team training on the right-hand side, that is typically focusing on the task the team has to execute. So if we go back to the sports team, that might be, say, a football team. So they might practice passing the ball. they might practice shooting, they might practice heading, they might practice interacting with each other, but they have a focus on what they're doing in the daily. So for example, an infantry team in the army, they might be executing drills together, they might be going to the shooting range, they might be practice I don't know, doing a reconnaissance mission. And those things are what we call team training. Now, on the left-hand side, we have team development. And team development is what we've been talking about all the way through this talk. So it's, what is your team dynamic at the moment? What level are you at? Are you mostly at a lower level, or are you mostly at a higher level? And what dynamic do you need for your context? And so getting your team dynamic right for your context, that is what team development is all about. So the model that I use is, for those of you who might have heard of Kurt Lewin, he's very famous. He's used a lot in the kind of the space of team practitioners, team development. And his change model, very simple. He talks about you have a stable dynamic on the left, and what you need to do is to unfreeze the dynamic that you have in the form of some kind of intervention. Then you need to change and then freeze where you're at and kind of reinforce and practice that new dynamic over time. So this is exactly what we try and do when we're working and building teams. So let me try and click through these slides. So you might start off with a team that has a fixed maturity level that it's currently at. So say the current team dynamic is reservation. So a typical McDonald's team, or a very simple army, recruit team, where the individuals are just focusing on themselves and the leader coordinates everything else. And say we need to get them up to, we're working in a company that's trying to start with lean or agile, and we want to change their dynamic and get them up to a production level where there's much more focus on the shared responsibility and continued improvement. So what we then do is we unfreeze it with an intervention, and the key thing here is we focus on the individual behaviors of those involved. And so what we need to develop then is, hopefully they have the first behaviors necessary in place, which is the kind of interpersonal behaviors. And then on top of that, we need to build among all the individuals, or as many as possible, is this idea of dependence behaviors, people making sure they're submitting to the team, but also following out other members of the team. So, if someone turns up late one day, it's not just the boss who's going, hey, come on, why are you 10 minutes late? Your teammates will go, come on, why are you 10 minutes late? We've all agreed that we're going to get here on time so we can start the day and have our meeting. Or control, getting everybody to take responsibility for the tasks. So even if the boss is away, every team member has an idea of what tasks need to get done. They're following up both themselves and others, and they're constantly thinking, what is it we're trying to achieve as a team? And everybody's taking responsibility for achieving those goals. And so encouraging those behaviors and working out, sitting down how you can get those behaviors and what we need to have in place as a team in order to get people to exhibit those behaviors, that is the intervention. And then once we've got up to that new dynamic, we need to kind of keep practicing over time. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you can think of team training, team development and team building is very similar to going to the gym. So, if you go to the gym and work out for 2 months, you'll get into good shape. But if you don't do anything for 6 months, your form and your conditioning is going to fall off. And it's very much the same with the team dynamic. If you just completely ignore it, it's probably the results and your dynamic is going to fall out of balance unless you use a little bit of time to reinforce it over time. So continued and sustained focus or training. So the methodology that we use is I personally use the SBGR system, and it's if you remember back to the professor that I was talking about, the Norwegian professor, he has a computer background and he's developed some computer software in order to allow you to map the current team dynamic. And so you basically just fill out a form as on the left-hand side, pressing the numbers, and out shoots a team report. Now, the team report is not going to give you the answer of how you develop, but it's really fantastic for creating a shared common awareness of where is the team now. and it kind of maps the terrain, as it were, and gives everyone a common mental model of what's going on, and that really provides the foundation for developing the team going forward. So, bonus lesson. So I like to say team development is like exercise. It's very much use it or lose it. If you don't work on it, you're not going to get better. And similarly, if you don't know what you're doing, you might hurt yourself. So if you go to the gym and you start lifting heavy weights and you don't know what you're doing, it's very easy to injure yourself. And it kind of sounds dramatic, but it can be a little bit the same with team coaching. So if you're an inexperienced team leader and you go on the internet and read up about some kind of team development exercise, and you think, okay, I'm going to practice this team development exercise with my team in order to improve my team dynamic. And actually, in some cases, it can actually do damage to your team dynamic. So if you're, let me give you an example. So say I was actually listening to a podcast in Norway, and one of the listeners sent in a situation, and it was the team leader had decided to do some team development with the team. And what they were doing is the team would sit around in a circle, and the team would pull out a question from the cup, and they would have to answer the question. And a lot of the questions were actually quite personal, the girl felt, and she said she didn't want to do this exercise anymore. And the whole point of the exercise was in order to improve the team dynamic and let people get to know each other better. However, the problem with the game was a lot of the questions were often personal, and some people would say, oh, I don't want to answer this. However, the team dynamic would get everybody to conform and force them to answer the question. Now, what team dynamic was the team leader trying to develop in that team? You know, it might be that was the right team dynamic, you know, maybe a sports team or something, or that was the right dynamic to develop, where the team is imposing its will on the individuals. However, if you're trying to develop a kind of a better team dynamic, a higher level of maturity, where people are able to challenge each other and say when they're not comfortable and say this is not a good idea, then you're not really encouraging the right behaviors with that game. So this is just an idea, whereas, you know, you've got to be making sure that the team development exercises you're doing are developing the right dynamic for what you actually want. Because not all team exercises are going to create the right results. So what if you want to find out more? If there's any of you that want to find out more, anyone who's looking to develop their team or just get any more information, then hit me up on LinkedIn. My name's Frederick Vladmark. I think I'm pretty much the only person with my name on LinkedIn, so it's very easy to find me. I'm not in the habit of doing this, but I was thinking just for this webinar, since you guys are taking the time to call in here and listen to this presentation, this webinar, if there's anybody who wants to do a free one-on-one call, that's something I can sort out. Just hit me up on LinkedIn and we can discuss exactly how we can help improve teams in your organization and unique in your environment. So just a little bit on what I offer. So I thought I'll just briefly present my consultancy offerings. So what I do is I support business leaders that are making their organizations more nimble and adaptable. And I offer a kind of different consulting services vis-a-vis the conventional consultancy firms. What we do is we take the best management methodologies from the military, those that are proven to work, that they're battle tested, and we help tailor them unique to your environment and context. We do this in order to help, really make organizations more nimble so that they can cope with all the challenges that pop up in a modern environment and also take advantage of all the opportunities that are also popping up. And I get my pointer up here. I don't know if you guys can see this, but we focus down from the individual level, which is more kind of leadership development. Then we also help with developing teams, innovative teams. And that's essentially what I've talked about today. Then we also teach decision-making in teams and how you can do strategic decision-making. And this is something that's taken right out of the military playbook. And then we also help businesses bridge the gap between business intelligence and business operations, which is a lot of people are struggling with. And then more organizational things, so leading by intent. A lot of you might have heard of objectives and key results. It's very similar to leading by intent, which is what in the Army they call mission command, which really allows for strategic alignment, strategic implementation of strategy, and empowering employees way down at the bottom of the organization. And then the last level is, how do you become agile as an organization? A lot of companies are implementing agile with a large capital A, are implementing agile at the team level and the project level, and they've got all these super agile teams running around, but as an organization, they don't know how to get them to pull in a common direction. And that's something that I work with, is how do you get the organization to become agile, and how do you get agility at that higher level, the next level up. And so we base this around, we have some seminars that we do, we also have workshops that we hold, and lastly is we also help firms with the implementation of these concepts, and there we offer advisory services. So that brings me to the end of the webinar. Thank you all very much for joining. My name's been Frederick Fladmark, and this has been all about lessons from the military on creating highly effective teams. I hope you've enjoyed today's webinar and you've received some value from today's webinar. If there's any of you that have any questions, if you look down towards the bottom of the screen, there should be a Q&A button. So just go down there, press on the button, and write in any of your questions if you have any questions. If there's no questions, I'll just assume that I answered all of the topics perfectly and I have a perfect webinar. Just joking. Okay. So we have a question here from Stephanie. So Stephanie says, thank you for sharing a very interesting team model and story. In your academic background, there is no mention of Hackman theories. In his research, Hackman states clearly that the general assumption is that individual behavior and attitude have a big impact on team performance. I know of no evidence that supports this assumption. Quite the contrary, the team performance is influencing the behavior and the attitude of individuals. Would that be possible? Also, the 5 steps from Google's bubble look close to Maslow's pyramid of needs. Are we not getting into models that are based on individual motivation of team members over assessing real team performance? Okay, so quite a long question, Stephanie. Let me start with the first question. So in response to talking about Hackman theories, I'm not familiar, I've not read his theories. However, if you look at how there's different theories and what's been fashionable in team development over the years, is that they kind of go through the cycle, and every 20 years it changes. So, if you go back to post-war theories of teams, and they were often looking at what made successful teams in the military, you'll see that there was a focus on this idea of it's being the sum of the individual contributions. And then over time, other theories come in and focus shifts to being more on, as you're pointing to here, that it's the team dynamic that is important and what the individuals are doing are not important. And if you just focus on the team dynamic and get all the team working together, then the individual behaviors will follow suit. I mean, I think it depends, it's a conceptual. I mean, I think there's a lot of theories that support both sides of the argument, but if you look at the trends in the arguments, it does go through a kind of cyclical behavior. And if you send me a message on LinkedIn, I have a graph actually on exactly that, and I can send you the kind of a prepared answer to that question. Moving on to the Google question. The 5 steps from Google's model looks close to Maslow's pyramids of needs. Stephanie asks, are we not getting into models that are based on individual motivation of team members over assessing real team performance? I mean, I would say that there are, of course, there's certain things that all team members need to have in place in order to perform. And so I think Hartsbarg talks about the hygiene factors, so all things that you need to have in place. You need to have a safe working environment, you need to have basic your basic pay, and certain other things in place for people to perform. So in some ways, yeah, I mean, there are certain things that everybody needs to have in place in order to perform. And then I think, I mean, I was actually reading up a little bit about Maslow a few days ago, and Maslow's idea of motivation was the idea that motivation comes from the gap between where you are as a person and where you want to be as a person. And I think if you're any team that you're on in which you feel that the team is going to help you move from where you are to be the person that you want to be, then you're going to find in a lot of intrinsic and internal motivation. And then you're getting up towards the top of Maslow's hierarchy. And I mean, I think it's all going to boil down to the team leader, and it's his ability to orientate people, to create a dynamic in the team where all their individual needs are required, and then also create opportunities for people to fulfill their higher needs as they come up higher up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I don't know, Stephanie, you can maybe send me a follow-up question. I don't know if that answered your question, but please do hook me up on LinkedIn and I can send you that graph. You might find that quite interesting. Well, I think that's all the questions. Thank you all very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed tonight's webinar, and yeah, maybe see you in a future Operational Excellence Society webinar. Take care.